African Renaissance. The concept that the African people and nations shall overcome the current challenges confronting the continent and achieve cultural, scientific, and economic renewal is here, with young men and women taking the lead. Some call them the new school heroes. We call them under 40 CEOs.
My presentation is meant to speak to wealth management. A bit of very quick introduction. So I work with Afrinvest, which is a group of companies ultimately collectively referred to as a full-service investment bank. And so what we do essentially spans across the entire spectrum of financial services, including securities trading, or what the rest of the market calls stockbroking. We've got wealth management, which again is the key topic of today's discourse. And then above all of that, we do investment banking, which essentially is providing advice to clients looking to either raise money for projects, and it could be any one of several buckets. For this presentation, I hope to do it in 20 minutes or less. But essentially, we're just trying to go on a journey to understand exactly what wealth management is. It's supposed to be, or well, let me put it this way. So the topic is interesting because it says wealth management. It talks about inspiring prosperity for the broader population. But the way I would like to approach this topic essentially is to start from the individual, because at the root of every society is the individual, prior to talking about the constituent unit, which is the family. But let's very quickly go through this. Now, what exactly is wealth management? There is a broad definition that talks about financial services, financial products, an objective, which is essentially to accumulate, grow, and preserve wealth. It talks about the products and services. It talks about the stakeholders and the various perspectives. One of those perspectives is that of the client, whose goal typically is to preserve his wealth, enhance his financial position, enhance his situation, achieve certain objectives, certain financial goals, with the help of a professional, typically. And for that purpose, you have financial advisors, people whose responsibility is to support the individual or the institution that seeks to achieve a certain financial objective or certain goal with respect to wealth and preservation. At the root of everything, really, there are what I like to call three fundamental building blocks. Typically, regardless of whether or not you're talking about an institution, an individual, a group of individuals, a body corporate, whatever you choose to call it, an investment club, a social club, a religious, institution, the process is the same. You earn income, however much, however small. You've got to apply discipline to your spending habits. Identifying what is a need and what are wants. Applying the discipline of keeping to and sticking to the principle of what needs to be incurred in terms of expenses, and then having the discipline to save. Now, some will call savings an impossibility given where we are, the economy we live in, and the sort of environments in which we operate. But the reality of everyone is that there isn't a one-cap-fits-all approach to this. If you told someone in Lagos, or the same way I heard, when you follow social media and see some debates where people argue, for example, that 19,800 is insufficient for living expenses for corpers living in certain cities, that argument actually is very valid. However, it is not the reality in every single city of this country. It's possible to save if you're not in certain cities or certain locations. And I like to use myself as an example. I served in a place in Oyo State, Okeogun, precisely. The town is called Igboho. It's about, well, I don't know what the travel time is from Ibadan. Ideally, because the roads have never been good. This was 2004, 2003, 2004. It took about 2.5 to 3 hours to get to that place from Ibadan. And it was barely an hour from Ilorin. At the time I was there, a lot of my friends were in, they just went, after we did the whole 3 weeks of camp, they all moved back to either Lagos or Port Harcourt or Abuja in search of jobs. I chose to stay back for 1 year. But while I was there, I was able to do two things. One, recall that the Alawi that is paid, there's a federal Alawi, which at the time was 7.5. And I was also paid a 4,000 naira stipend to teach in a public school. Or rather, I was posted to the local government to work as an engineer, which is how I trained. But then I got there and realized that all we had to do was essentially dig drains across the city, and I thought that was an inefficient use of my time. And that I would rather contribute to helping the students with maths and computer science and integrated science and such subjects. The 4,000 naira I was paid as a teacher was actually sufficient for me to live over a 30-day period, both in terms of buying food, cooking, moving around with bikes. And so the 7.5 I was paid as a federal Alawi was actually not needed at the time. And so what did I do? I started buying into stocks. I bought into the IPOs of Zenith and GTB. I bought into the IPO of Shonik and several others like that. That was 2004. The consolidation of 05, I kept doing all of that. Now, some of those in Lagos clearly couldn't live off 7.5. Clearly not. So, again, the narrative is different. But ultimately, at the root of this discipline is three things. One, recognize the quantum of income you earn. What are your needs? What are your wants? The needs, you try and meet them. The wants, every now and then you give yourself a treat. But ultimately, pay yourself first. And pay yourself first is what? Savings. It's from that pool of savings that you then go on to invest. And the options are myriad. Now, what is the process? To manage wealth, it starts with that first principle of discipline. Determining what choices you need to make to achieve the goals you have set for yourself. Discipline because it takes consistent practice, it takes a commitment to a lifestyle. An investor is someone who has the knack of recognizing opportunities and taking advantage of those opportunities. And it's the same principle that applies to building wealth. It can be done. It requires time, it requires dedication and discipline, and it requires commitment. Once you set out what those goals are, and you lay the groundwork, and you stick to them over time, I think the key thing is to recognize that time is your friend when you're talking about investment and building wealth. Over time, you will begin to get the results you seek. But first, you've got to determine, what are the goals I want? What are my objectives? You've got to lay it out. However modest it is, however small it may seem, it always starts small. And once you've done that, the next step is to talk to someone who is a professional, who knows what it is that's required to drive and push you towards achieving those objectives. Because remember, some people are trained, and all they do every day is look at the markets, look at the various, what we like to call variables in the market. What does the macroeconomy say? What is the outlook for inflation? How do we see the exchange rates moving? What is the impact on the local investment market? If you're to buy a company's stock, what is the best time to buy it? Why should you buy one and not the other? Again, there's so many things in there. Therefore, it makes sense for you to talk to somebody whose job it is every day to look at the markets and make sense of the market. And then working with you through those goals you've set will begin to then make the investment calls and take the steps that should, over time, get you to your destination. Back a bit. So, it's important that if you're going to try to understand what wealth management is and how it impacts the markets, you've got to first of all identify what are the features or what are the elements of wealth, or what are the habits, or what are the practices, or what are the lifestyle choices of those who are wealthy, and what are the things that they do. What are the goals? What are their typical expectations? From that perspective, if you're to look at wealth management, you ask yourself, what do high net worth, or what do rich, or what do wealthy people typically do? What are the things they expect? And if you're on the side where you're talking about understanding your client's needs, before you can then set out goals for yourself, you've got to understand, okay, what are those things that people actually need in life? Because ultimately, wealth is supposed to serve a purpose. Based on certain surveys that are done, you will find that there are a range of different things that people expect, typically, when they set out a goal for themselves. Some will say, you know what, I want to live a comfortable life. What does comfortable life mean? They define it for themselves. I want to live in a certain neighborhood. I want to be able to eat out every weekend, or travel every other year, or travel every year, whatever it is. Some will say, you know what, I would like to be able to build up capacity so that my children can go to whatever schools they want to attend and money will not be an object or an issue. Some will say, you know what, I want to be financially secure to the point where in the event of any negative externalities, sudden, negative developments, and I get caught unawares, I shouldn't have to worry too much. Some will say, you know what, I want to be able to leave something behind for my children, an estate. Leave them a will, a trust that can do certain things for them and ensure that they don't fall below a certain standard, And there are all sorts of things. Some will say, you know what, I want to just grow my wealth aggressively for whatever reasons, and all that, So there are a range of things. Some will say, you know what, I want to be able to set up a charity that addresses certain segments of society, perhaps a function of their own experiences in life, perhaps a function of some of the things they've seen that they're maybe most passionate about, and they decide, you know what, we need to fix this, And ultimately, there are all sorts of reasons. Now, if as an individual you're trying to do this, you've got to then say to yourself, okay, what are my own personal drivers? What are the things I would like to do? I picked the top 10, call it reasons for people wanting to build wealth. Yours might just be 4. Somebody else will have 6. Someone will have 8. I think the key thing to say really, ultimately, is that there isn't a silver bullet, there isn't a template that works for everybody. The key thing here is to recognize that you have to customize it to the individual. Understanding who you are as a person. Am I someone who has a lot of appetite for risk? Do I like to take, a gamble, take a bet on emerging technologies, on new trends, whatever it is? Working with your investment advisor or the financial advisor to craft a bespoke, and bespoke means essentially customized for you, a package, tailor a product that suits you and your own lifestyle, your choices, your circumstances, in order to push you towards those goals that you set with the help of your advisor. And that's how to start off. The next part really then talks about why you want to do this. So in this case, I've picked 4 reasons. One, I said, you know what, to secure a financial future. In the prime of your youth, when you're most strong, like many of us in this room are, your earning capacity is, quote and unquote, deemed to be at its peak. Your ability to generate income on a personal level or in your home is supposedly at the peak. But as with all things in life, if you're blessed with longevity and you live long, progressively with time, both in terms of the society moving forward, advances in technology, it may come a time when you are no longer in a position to earn as much as you used to. Perhaps you are not as productive. The economy has moved in such a way that your skill sets and your ability to generate economic potential and therefore value is not at the same level as it used to be. And so what happens? Will your living standards fall, or will you then begin to depend? Like many people, and some of the more topical issues around, pensions being paid for airline workers and things like that, where you are then dependent on somebody somebody being magnanimous enough to release monies when they should, and they are not living in penury and hunger. Again, critical topical issues. So you tell yourself, while I'm in my productive years, I've got to build up something that takes care of me when the time comes when I'm unable to earn as much as I used to. That's one point. Again, you think about your kids, which is, for many of us, it's a key driver, it's a key motivator. I think with all things in life, for many people, you want to see your children do better than you did, live better than you did, achieve certain heights that perhaps for you was just a dream, but due to limitations, perhaps your parents weren't as wealthy, you wanted to attend certain kinds of schools, you couldn't get a scholarship and you couldn't pay the tuition, or you wanted to live a certain lifestyle, but for you was all a dream. Suddenly, you're at this point where you tell yourself, okay, some of the things I couldn't do, you then try to live through your children vicariously. Well, again, it's noble, but ultimately, you want to give them better than you got. Whatever the object is. Some of us went to federal government colleges. Today, I don't know, when I talk to my peers, are we prepared to send our kids to those same schools? The overwhelming response is very lukewarm. For most people, clearly that is not the choice. But the private schools that we then aspire to, if you think about it, are a lot more expensive than what we paid when we went to school. So in order to sustain and fund the sort of lifestyle you want for yourself and your children, you've got to think actively about some of these choices. And then, of course, you have unforeseen emergencies. Again, life happens. So sometimes something goes wrong. Today, there's a consensus amongst us that, look, for many of us who supposedly think we're in a middle class, all it takes to drop out of that is one health emergency. The cost of healthcare is so dire that without the right insurance cover, without some bit of assets, some cash, some liquid capacity to fund bills, if you get hit, God forbid, by a bad situation, it could actually throw you out of where you used to be economically in terms of the rankings. And then, of course, post-productive years, once you've retired, you want to live a certain standard. If you used to live in a certain way, you want to be able to at least not drop too far off from where you used to live in terms of quality of life and all that. So those are some of the reasons why you have to actively, it's an active decision, it's an active verb, you've got to do it. Investments is an active, continuous process. Again, I mentioned several Ds before: discipline, dedication. It's something that is done over time. I think at the root of wealth management, the core skills required to manage wealth are the same core skills required to actually build it. So when we talk about discipline, one way to enforce it is actually to automate your finances. But automating finances only starts from you actually knowing what those finances are. A lot of time in Nigeria, we very actively debate the issue of what? The national budgets. They've not passed the budget. Oh, the executive prepared it on time. Oh, sorry, the National Assembly are the ones holding it up. They are sabotaging the presidency, the executive. And we all go back and forth about the budget. But for most business people, when you sit down early in the year talking to them, everyone is sort of watching to see how the federal budget was what? Put together. How does it speak to the future? What does it say about the plans of government for the economy? Because many times it's a signal as to some of the things they intend to do. In the same way you have a national budget for a country, it's the very same way as individuals we should have a budget. There are so many tools, and thankfully in this age of the internet and social media, there are tools available even within applications such as Excel. When you launch Excel, one of the first things you see is a tab with certain templates. Some of those templates are actually what? Budgeting templates, personal finance templates. The discipline of actually tracking, because you cannot build on something you don't track. So start with, first of all, a personal financial tracker. Recognize where your income comes from, what are those sources, how much is it, what are your expenses, how do you spend money, on what? And these tools are so iterative. In fact, in some cases, there are apps that work as well to speak to some of the needs you may have. Helps you identify how much of your budget goes into feeding, transport, accommodation, and all that. Entertainment, housing, clothing. Starting with those will then tell you what type of lifestyle you should live. If you determine that you want to live a certain lifestyle, it will tell you very quickly whether or not you can support it. if you determine to build wealth, then the question is, what are the things I can do without? What are the things I can do? Do I need to live in a certain location in order to achieve a certain goal? And then you keep doing that. Automate your finances. Pay yourself first, meaning you set a goal, and then that's the first line charge on your income. Some will say, well, it's not sustainable. How much do you earn? What is that income level? But I always say, start from where you are. If it means, for example, pairing up. When I started my first job, I got 2 other friends, and we said, guys, look, we can't afford to live where we want to live, which was Bagada. We were all in Festac at the time, or Satellite Town. What do? 3 of us get together, get an apartment, a 3-bed, and then we split the rent 3 ways. Back then, it was 350K. Between 3 of us, it was more affordable at 100 and maybe 10 or 115 each. 2 of us had a car, and what we did again was to carpool. So twice a month, one person drives, the other 2 weeks, the other person drives. You save fuel for half the time. So again, it's about automating, but it starts with tracking it. The other money habit is, so having automated your finances, the next thing is to have specific goals. Again, we're back to this point, meaning you've got to set goals. They've got to be practical, they've got to be realistic, and they have to be achievable. Sometimes when you can't, the fact that you set the goal itself allows you to achieve something. So even if you don't hit 100%, if what you did was 50% of that goal, you're already on the way. The key thing is sticking to the plan, being disciplined about it, and the dedication and commitment would obviously carry you through. The next thing, two, in a sense, is to have the right mentality, the mindset that, wealth starts in the mind. If you determine and set goals for yourself and say, I'm set out to achieve certain objectives, and you stick to that, a healthy, balanced mentality that is positive would actually propel you closer to your goal than one that is negative. Again, I don't understand the psychology of it. I'm not a psychologist. And what that also does, which is the second thing, is it attracts people of like minds. So you've got to be careful about the choice of company. If you made a certain decision or choice about the kind of lifestyle you want to live, but those around you are people who don't share the same philosophy or the same mindset, odds are you will probably not actually achieve that goal, because you will not get the support and the systems around you to help propel you towards that. But if perhaps the kind of people around you are those who share a similar mindset or a similar philosophy or outlook, perhaps with their support you can help yourselves move forward. The rest of the slides, which isn't responsive, I'll just talk through them. When you've done all of that, the question becomes, okay, what are the options that are available? And there are a myriad of them. At this point, I'm just going to run through them very quickly. We will not dwell in detail or to discuss them. But between the 2 spectrums of what we call finance, equity and debt, you've got several options that are available. Some will say, well, I don't do equities. What is equities? You buy stock. Within that market where you have more than 200 companies, there are companies that consistently continue to do what? Grow, continue and consistently continue to pay dividends, continue to create value. Some of them you may not be sufficiently trained to pick, but there are those who are there, and that's why we talk about financial advisors, having the right people behind you, those who are skilled and prepared to support those decisions. How to pick the right stock, when to pick the right stock, because sometimes the stock is right, the timing is not right. You've got bonds, right, which are instruments issued either by companies or governments where they borrow in order to fund certain projects and pay a fixed return. You've got money markets, which is essentially you going to buy, again, there are so many mutual funds today that speak to money markets. You've got Eurobonds, which is one that I like. It allows you to buy into foreign currency bonds, even if it's local. And what that does is achieve 2 things. One is acts as a hedge against devaluation, while also giving you a return in FX. Again, there are several institutions that allow people to access these things right here in country, in the same city, and knowing that. You've got real estate, so there's a host of several things. The question is, how can you access real estate? Land is expensive, land is pricey. But these days on radio, you hear people advertise land, and they provide payment plans, monthly plans, 2 years, 3 years, pay installments, 20,000, 50,000, and then you buy into an asset that is able to grow in value. I won't run through the details of this slide, but ultimately, let's suffice to say that, you know what, this is the start of a conversation. It is near impossible to exhaust it in one 20-minute speaking session, but ultimately, I think the key thing is to point people along the path that says it is possible to achieve certain objectives. It starts with you setting a goal, being disciplined about it, leveraging the right tools that are available, and speaking to professionals who are comfortable, knowledgeable, and readily available in the industry to support you towards your goal. At this point, I'd like to thank you for your time.